Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and as promised, we are going to do the deep dive with Derrick Broze. If you saw my two deep dives, which really only covered the first, I think 60 plus pages of it, 62, 63, we ended at a really juicy note. I told you to go check out Derrick's deep dive because nobody's done more research into the matter than Derrick, and you can check him out at theconsciousresistance.com. That's also where his documentary is available, where it is Who Will Find What the Finders Hide. It's excellent. It's really essential watching before you even dig into these documents, so you have some idea what to find. Not a lot of people have talked about the book The Game Caller in the manner that Derrick has, and not only that, but interviewed one of the members of the Finders who probably authored the thing. So, really interesting times. First of all, when you found out about this vault drop, you're already in the middle of this campaign for mayor in Houston, right? You've got a million things going on. What do you do?
Well, yeah. So, man, I got a few people tweeted at me, basically letting me know, hey, there's a new document dump, and we've talked about this already. We talked about the finders. I'm like, okay, FBI is posting documents, and as we were just mentioning a moment ago, a lot of it is duplicate information, especially if you've already been down this rabbit hole. If you've already been researching, you kind of know quite a bit of it. You've seen some of this, but there's definitely new material. There's definitely fresh stuff that we're going to get into, but because of the busyness of this campaign, I wasn't able to immediately look at it last Friday when it dropped. I had to wait till just a few days ago. And then once, the kind of clarity came in of, oh my God, this is actually something, there's some good stuff here. There's some new information. I had to drop everything and spend a good few hours just going through it page by page. And we did post that dive as well. And so happy to be here kind of explaining and exploring that with you, man, because I know you've seen some things yourself.
Well, absolutely, my brother. And, looking at these documents, I've now gone through 142 pages. I've done two dives where we read through everything. And since I had not seen the previously released material that you used for this documentary, what strikes you as stuff that we haven't seen before, just in the context of the reports? Like, have some of these police reports been unavailable, redacted? Which ones are brand new to researchers like yourself?
So yeah, most of it again is stuff that we already either knew 100% or we were able to point to and say, look, this seems pretty clear X, Y, and Z. We already knew Raymond Martinez, the customs agent, is one of the original people that got the whole thing started. He walked through the warehouses whenever they raided the finders' properties in DC, and he's the one who had the customs report, which was circulated by Ted Gunderson and also Skip Clements in the FBI, and among others. So we knew that, and there's copies of that and references to that in there. The FBI dump also has Tallahassee Police Department documents, which, funnily enough, that stuff had already been released unredacted, but they went and redacted some parts of it that were already known. So I don't know what they're doing. But the biggest things I would say, other than kind of bit pieces here, like the main focal point that I would say is new that we didn't have, we haven't seen the Washington Metro Police Department's documents themselves. We've seen that Sergeant John Stitcher, who died shortly after the 1987 Finders Tallahassee incident, said that, hey, somebody, the CIA, in his words, shut down the Washington Metro Police Department investigation. So we had his kind of testimony and his words, and we had other pieces, but we hadn't seen their documents themselves. And for those who are, kind of looking into the pages, when you get into about page 64, that's where you have the Washington Metro Police Department memos, and that's where they start to make it pretty clear. Page 67 is probably, I think, the most just kind of stunning admission when the investigator who is writing this, basically a full summary, makes it plainly clear that the CIA was involved in the finders, and makes it clear that that this investigator was recommending that they should be following the finders, having somebody kind of on them, because although they claim to have disbanded, that they admit that in the finders' master plans that they talked about pretending to disband, but instead splintering off into different groups and renaming themselves and continuing the work, much like other sort of secret societies and things that this audience will be familiar with. So I feel like that, and then there's other pieces, of course, but that section alone is just like, okay, of all the things that they redacted, why would they not redact that? That's kind of a whole other question I've been asking myself as well.
Well, I would say this. If you look at the things that were redacted, For instance, we have the psychological report and the physical report of the children, the two summaries of that. That, although they go into later on with the handwritten Tallahassee reports where they clearly say that the children were abused, they talk about the conversations. They say that there's a confirmation of 2 after they go to HRS, Human Social Services or whatever at the time. But what it says in that physical report examination, and that seems to be blacked out because that's been released separately. What is that information?
You're talking about the psychological report, the report, and the kind of medical evaluation,
yeah,
right?
The medical evaluation of the children.
So
sure.
That's the Tallahassee Police Department. They had already, because just to recap for everybody, it was the Tallahassee Police Department that arrested the guys, and that kind of set off the whole thing. And then they start communicating with DC because DC's like, hey, we think we've been researching, or they had already. Now we know the documents. They had been aware of the finders back into the 70s. So DC was already familiar with the finders, and this was kind of giving them justification to go raid some of the properties. Of course, the whole thing gets taken over and squashed really quickly. But it seems like initially somebody in the at least more than 1 or 2 police officers and investigators in the Washington Metro Police and the Tallahassee Police Department were genuinely trying to investigate this and trying to uncover what they were getting into here. And so in the Tallahassee police reports, like you said, it's the Department of, I think, Health and Human Services, something along those lines. That's where they make it clear that 2 of the kids, Mary and I can't remember the other boy's name, had clear signs of sexual abuse, in that one of the kids was like crapping all over himself, and they said there were clear signs of being sodomized, and that Mary had, her hymen had been broken, and there were clear signs of penetration. I know some people say like, hey, different girls, young girls, hymens breaks at different point. That could be anything. Yeah, you could argue that, but I mean, you put it in the context of the situation we're in, and it makes a little more sense that would be a sign of some kind of sexual activity to a very young child. They're like 6 and 7 years old, these kids. And so we know for certain that was already reported, that was in there. But then again, ultimately the TPD, the Tallahassee Police Department, also says nothing to see here. But now that we have the Tallahassee Police Department documents and we have the Metro Police Department, at least some of the report, it's clear that both of those departments believed there was something to this case. And now we also know that it was not only the CIA, but it was the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency within the FBI that helped shut the whole thing down.
Yeah, and let's talk about some more of the abuses that are kind of revealed here. It's revealed that these kids, number one, weren't allowed in the house they were supposedly staying out in D.C. They were in some other place. 2, that they were playing games to get rewards, one of which was taking clothes off of grown men. And then, it's kind of backtracked that they would only admit that they took the jacket off of the old man. But later on, they were also being told that they would go babysit. But it wasn't really babysitting because they weren't being put in charge of children. They were staying with adults. And they admit that a woman walked down naked at one point in front of these children. These are huge revelations that kind of shows at least some of the details. Now, one of the things that I observed off of this, and I want to go back to that page because it is a nice little summation of what this guy thinks the finders were. And we're not saying that every single one of the members was involved in child sexual abuse. In fact, I would think only a fraction of the members was very compartmentalized. But getting back to the information in these documents, it's very clear that they were based in a reward system. They were around adults they had never seen before and left with them as well. They were head to toe, bit in insect bites. They were all extremely unkempt. I mean, you start putting these pieces together of several police officers saying the same exact thing. They got examined by medical examiners. The people that handled them had several identities and were completely uncooperative. They find the computer equipment in the van where the children know that they're receiving orders from the game caller. I mean, the only case I can think of that is even close to this bizarre is the current Epstein case, man. Like, there's really nothing else out there. And now that you know about the different references to brainwashing, the mind control books that they found there, and the fact that in that first run through before the FBI gets there, all of the evidence that is collected seems to be completely unaccounted for. And, whenever someone tries to obtain it, it just doesn't exist. Let's speak to that.
Yeah, so you definitely made a couple of good points there. Well, I want to address one thing first. I see one of the commenters saying something about, this kind of being a turf war between the FBI and the CIA, but it should be clear as well that like the FBI it was just is just as guilty in covering this up as the CIA or being a part of it. Maybe there's some interagency thing going on, but the reality is that the FBI and the Department of Justice had a chance to expose this in 1993, and they covered it up too. So they're all complicit in this. And then, yeah, like you talked about some of the brainwashing and the abuse of the kids. And then, as you mentioned as well, it's not that every single member of the Finders was involved in this, because that's part of their whole shtick is you have kind of an outer group that doesn't realize what the inner group's doing. And on page 213, they specifically say that the Finders was a CIA group, but then, and this could also be not fully factual. Some of this could be disinfo, but they do say a splinter group of the original Finders group, which itself was a CIA operation, broke off and became involved in sexual abuse. Now, so that's kind of taking the approach that, it wasn't a sanctioned thing. It was like some rogue splinter group. Could be true. Or maybe it's sanctioned at a different level that, again, compartmentalization, it might be sanctioned at a level that is above somebody's pay grade where they don't realize like, hey, no, the Finders intelligence operation is sanctioned and the Finders sexual abuse operation is sanctioned. So there's definitely compartmentalization going on. And the books, they talk about finding books, mentioning brainwashing techniques. And, what I've tried to do now that we have a fuller fleshing out of the story is any names that are available, especially in the documents, there's a few different names, and the people listed, most of them are dead. That's the thing. They redact, or they leave names available if the person's already dead and they can't speak. If we find the name of somebody involved in this case, like I've found Officer Scott Hunt, who was involved in the Tallahassee Police Department, I believe, and I can't get him to speak, but he was one of the people who said that there was a clear cover up. Then we have, of course, Raymond Martinez with the customs agent, and there's other names that are listed. And I don't know if you've already mentioned to your audience, or if you saw one of the first videos I did, that there's a guy listed in there several times who's involved with the child pornography. The DOJ. His name's George Bergesser, and he was involved in this early 90s investigation into the Finders and many other things. He was apparently one of the first guys investigating child porn trafficking via the internet, like way back in the 90s, before it was anything like it is now. And so I don't know what happened exactly, but I know that in 2018, April last year, he goes on a boating trip with his son. His son goes downstairs to the boat, hears a noise, and comes upstairs, and all of a sudden Dad's missing, and they find Dad's body, floating down a little bit down the river. And no real explanation. They kind of say, it could have been medical, it could have been an accident. I'm trying to find the sons and the who are adult men and ask if they have anything to say, or if there's anything about that. It could be unrelated to the Finders, but it could generally be involving this guy's work. If he's involved with investigating child porn and trafficking for the last 20 years, 30 years or so, it could be more to the than what we're being told. So I think that's key for me, is we need to find as many of these people as possible. It's clear that the CIA is involved. It's even more clear that there was trafficking going on. It's clear that it was covered up. It definitely seems to be probably similar to, some of these kind of storied events of kids being brainwashed or indoctrinated to say or speak certain things. And it's also very odd that they include the McMartin preschool map in there and Ted Gunderson's archaeology report, not his report, but the archaeologist report that Ted Gunderson had circulated at the time about the McMartin preschool. I don't know if this is meant to indicate that they found the connection to the Finders there and that the Finders were also involved in that, because that was going on in California. So, but we do know that the Finders were, all around the country. We've heard reports of Kentucky, Virginia, San Francisco,
George is in
Florida,
there.
Yeah, DC, Georgia. All over the place. So, I think that what may be known as the Finders is really just this, what Danny Castellaro, journalist, called the octopus, or something. It's a network, and this same network could be the Epstein network. I was talking earlier today with John Brisson, who's another really good researcher who's been on this, and there's a name mentioned in there towards the end, Paul. I can't remember it. It's slipping my mind right now. But this guy, John was telling me, is also a well-known Mossad asset. So there might be a Mossad connection as well to the Finders. And Jonathan Pollard, I think, actually, is what his name is.
Oh, Pollard. Hey, well, if you know who Jonathan Pollard is, I'll tell you who Pollard is. Pollard's the one that was arrested. I did a whole video on him about a month and a half ago. He was the one that was arrested for espionage in this country on behalf of Israel. He was an American citizen, I believe.
Okay.
He was
Yeah.
out of Texas, and actually he was supposed to spend the rest of his life in prison. They tried to negotiate a deal with Clinton. They weren't able to do so. They did negotiate a deal. He's still in the country with the Barack Obama administration, which is pretty unprecedented. Israel's always lobbied on his behalf, but he got caught giving up state secrets to them. Flickoff says, I love the deep dives. Keep it up. Before I go any further, I do want to read this segment to the audience because I haven't gotten to this part. This is going to be part 3 of my deep dive, but let's read it. This is the summary. And here's the thing. You notice the secret. I also focused on this. When you're reading through the documents earlier, and you see that you're not going to get the evidence that went through that first sweep, and then all of a sudden 2 things are blacked out. They also mention that everything to do with this report from the Metro DC police will then be classified as secret. And here are those documents. So this is just the summary of the report. We're going to get deeper without Derrick, but it is the writer's belief that the Finders organization is and has been utilized by the Central Intelligence Agency as a disinformation service, spreading non-essential, non-critical information to various organizations throughout the United States and overseas. So what does that mean? That means it's international, that Marion Petty, who we haven't mentioned, who is the game caller, is basically got these people under different levels of control to do certain things that might seem nonsensical, but at the very end are providing disinformation all over the place, and they're for hire organization. So, the plausible deniability is always going to be there. This group, to the most part, is made up of over-educated non-achievers who lack the inborn initiative to succeed on their own. In other words, people who are smart but easily led. Therefore, they fell in with the charismatic leader, this is Petty, who gave them the directions of self-importance. To the most part, this organization individually is harmless. However, when directed and monitored by a controlling factor, a.k.a. the handlers of Petty himself, the CIA, or whoever else they're working for, they are capable of destructive and illegal activities. As in any cult structure, the main drive is for the group and individual's values and ideology is lost. Therefore, when a member is asked to perform a task that heretofore may have been objectionable, the abuse of children, he or she performs the mission for the good of the group. As to the abuse of the children, I do not think, I think this is key, that child abuse was a planned tactic of this group, aka all of them, aka on the outward. But as in any cross-section of society, sick and demented subjects belong to a cult as well. I believe that by shaping of the children is a planned experiment of this group, as in the case of the Nazis as they strove for a perfect society. Thereby, in their own tried to form a group of children and ultimately adults that did not suffer the ills of normal society, but took only the benefits that afforded them, quote-unquote, perfection. I think that says a lot. What's your take on that passage, Derrick?
Yeah, so like I said, there's the narrative that, well, they were an intelligence outfit, or at least they were a front for it. They were involved in some capacity, but the sexual abuse wasn't part of the procedure, right? That was just some rogue thing. And we have seen that in other documents where they claim that the Finders was originally a group that was being used for intelligence. We know that they were training some members of the CIA and computer skills and things of that sort. And then that somehow at some point they became a rogue agency. I'm not 100% ready to say that I think that is factual what's going on. I know that there are some folks who are just ready to speculate and immediately say, no, the whole thing from top to bottom is sanctioned by somebody. I mean, it seems, it could be true. Maybe the pedophiles within the CIA got strong enough to kind of compartmentalize and send out people on missions that involved sexual abuse of children. And the original purpose of the Finders was something less nefarious and more just disinfo and things like that. But like I said earlier, we still have to call into question why these documents would be released right now and why that giant passage wouldn't be redacted.
Well, again, I think it's because although they were able to redact, I mean, that whole section is really damning. Let's just scroll up with what you're talking about. It's what I ended on early, and there are. This is the medical reports and the physical reports that are redacted in that section. So I think at the end of the day, they're trying to make this part look like speculation at best, but when you get to the hard evidence, although it's already available, it's kind of obstructed. You know what I'm saying? And they can still play that, well, he is kind of a lunatic card. And, you're not sure which one of the members they're actually interviewing about Petty, And why don't you tell people about your interview that's in that documentary with one of the members of the Finders?
Yeah, so Marion David Petty is the founder of the Finders. He was nicknamed the Stroller, the Game Caller. Had several different nicknames by the group, and he's a key player, obviously, as the founder of this, and he's got a whole laundry list of intelligence connections in his past, starting with working for naval intelligence, and then supposedly just leaving and becoming a limo driver that happened to drive limos for all kinds of well-known generals and people in intelligence. His wife worked for the CIA. His son worked for the CIA's front airline. All these kinds of connections. And one of his main people, according to Robert Toby Terrell, who's the guy I interviewed, he was also nicknamed. If you find some of the older Finders articles, you'll see that he was the spokesperson. He sometimes called himself Genghis Plato. And in fact, when this was going down in 1987, during one of the press conferences, they describe him as wearing. He had a Ronald Reagan mask on the back of his head, and he talked to them like that, with the back of his head facing them, and gave this press conference, just, ridiculous stuff. But when I found him and tracked him down in Gainesville, Florida, running this place called the Zen Hostel, or what used to be called the Zen Hostel, now it's like an art gallery, and he just lives up in this little attic-y space, pretty creepy little spot. But his phone number was the same as it has been listed on in the Game Caller book, so I just gave it a shot, and it was him, and said, hey, I'm working on a documentary. I didn't indicate that I was coming there to basically called him out or to accuse him of anything like that. Yeah, there you go. There's the image of him. Wasn't indicating that I was going to make him look out to be anything, because honestly, I was coming into this. I had only been researching the Finders for about a month or so and vaguely knew about them before then. So I wasn't coming in like, I'm going to prove this guy's a pedophile. I was like, I'm going to give him a chance to speak, instead of speculate more, actually talk to somebody who was deeply involved in this incident.
And by the way, he wouldn't necessarily have been one of the pedophiles, because the people that were actually caught with these children were in Tallahassee, Florida, and he wasn't with them. It was two separate members. He talks about in your interview sharing a toothbrush with this guy Petty for basically 15 years. That's how close he was. But when you're in the business of intelligence, counterintelligence, brainwashing, disinformation, you keep your friends close, and not only your enemies, but people very close to you in so much of a know. Everything's a need-to-know basis. So everything that he told you could have been extremely genuine, because I do believe that these quote-unquote games were, kind of the initiation device to see how far they could get certain people to go. So I'm sorry for interrupting. Continue.
No, you're right about that. But I will say, I do think Toby Terrell was part of the inner circle. I think I've gone from making the documentary and interviewing with him, sitting down and kind of being creeped out, but like, okay, I'm just going to report what I've found and let the people be the judge of it, to feeling even more confident that he is lying. And I've been able to, and this is the thing is, I actually tried to call him this morning, and that number's now disconnected. So I might make a trip out to Florida soon and see if I can contact him and do another sit down. And if he's willing to, who knows, he might have taken off. But I want to, because at the time, like I said, I didn't have all the information I had now. I hadn't looked at the Tallahassee Police Department documents yet. If I had, I would have been able to follow up with them and say, okay, well, you claim this is all BS conspiracy theory, but how come the Tallahassee Police Department documents clearly say there was evidence of child sexual abuse? Can you explain that or anything like that? So, and now that we have the FBI documents, there's even more to kind of, hey, what about this Metro PD report, that's saying you guys were obviously intelligence? Again, maybe he was an inner circle. But as you said, he shared the toothbrush with the founder of the Finders for 25 years, said it was his, buddy, his right-hand man. And he seemed kind of like the paper talked about to be one of these people who lack their own direction. I mean, if you listen to the interview, he says he had a wife, he had kids, and he basically abandoned them and quit his job and gave like his life savings over to the communal bank. I can't remember what they called it, but that was part of the thing too, is they would get everybody to dump their money into a big fund and say, you could always take from it whenever, and it's just part of the communal family fund or whatever. So I mean, that sounds like somebody that fits the description of what that report was talking about, that got sucked into this world and, probably did whatever Petty wanted. And the games were definitely key to it. I think that's how they keep some of the people just chasing their tails. They send them out on all these different games, while the inner circle, and we have to remember that a lot of the members, including for those who want to dig in, Kristen with a K, Noth, and that's Knauth. If you look up Kristen Noth, you can find her in different places. She's one of the parents, allegedly one of the parents of the kids at that time. Her mom was one of the parents that were saying, hey, our child has been brainwashed by Marion Petty and by the finders, was raising alarms. She's still out there. She's still around claiming to be an intelligence expert and a journalist. And so that's the thing, is some of these people, many of them are still out there writing articles, having gigs. They claim to just be journalists. I think that's part of the disinfo that they were talking about, that's probably what they're actively engaged in. And there might be others who were very aware of the child abuse going on.
Well, in those Tallahassee reports, one of the fathers of two of the children, who's divorced from the mother, was told that, they were being taken care of. And he's horrified to find out, how they're dirty, they're unkempt, they're with men that they shouldn't be. And that when he tried to visit her the one time, that, nobody answered the door, saw someone peek out, went back the next day, talked to a man. He's later contacted and said that was her husband. Just the most bizarre things, about these people's children and how they wanted charges pressed and they wanted custody of those kids afterwards, yet that kind of gets buried under the rug.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are now very, very detailed in these handwritten Tallahassee reports that personally I had never seen before. Again, this is my first time going through the document dumps. But the other big thing is that they do have master plans and that they do dirty tricks to their enemies. Speaking to that disinformation campaign, why in the world, if they are actively engaged in disinformation, and then you listen to, what one of the guys did when they tried to ask him questions in the cell. He literally flopped around on the ground, closed his eyes, refused to answer any questions. They wouldn't even sign something that they'd been read their Miranda rights. I mean, this is classic, discooperative behavior to authorities to kind of, get it to another legal level, to not tell them anything. This is intelligence behavior. So why in the world, if they were engaged in intelligence behavior, would they ever be honest with any reporter, even yourself?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I went into this knowing, and now even more knowing that, hey, it's part of their manual, their master plan, to do dirty tricks, to deceive people, to claim that they've broken up while secretly still, being together in some other form. We also know, going back to the Tallahassee incident, we know that the finders were using technology that was definitely available, but not available to the average person, and would probably be more available to an intelligence agent and definitely somebody in the government, because they talked about how they were essentially able to use, it sounds like broadband internet, plugging in, communicating. They had their own kind of private server, and some of the messages that, that Raymond Martinez and others talk about is that they found reports basically of them communicating, of Petty telling them to get out of town and advising them how to avoid the cops, and of them, like, kind of some of the finders basically saying, what happened to our buddies, the guys who had got arrested? They weren't aware yet. And so they found all these things, all these telexes, all this communication, showing that they were actively communicating of how to get around the cops, how to get out of the city, this kinds of stuff. And there's also originally, it's been documented that there were 10 kids. There were 6 that were caught in Tallahassee with the other 2 men, but the finders were traveling in 2 vans. One of the vans was there in Tallahassee with the 2 men, Michael Howell and the other guy, and the 6 kids. But the other van with the other 4 kids, we have no idea what happened with that, or where it went to, or, there was this talk of they were headed to Mexico for some school for brilliant children. That could have all been BS, but wherever they were originally, or were headed to the next stop, they might have just continued on while these guys got caught up and the whole thing, went south.
Yeah, and that's really bizarre too, because with those 4 children, we never really get the identities of them. We don't know who drove off with them. We do know that we have redactions of names throughout the documents to whoever was talked to. But as soon as this investigation was initiated, it moved quickly, Derrick. They got those warrants extremely quickly. And I think that's why the FBI was a day behind to control the situation, at least at the highest levels. So let's talk about that a little bit, how everything just seems to get shut down as soon as the FBI gets in there and takes control of this investigation. Because the Tallahassee Police Department continues to ask questions, and they get the runaround. Meanwhile, they have to share all of their information and what they've gathered with the FBI when they come to town.
Absolutely. So, to that point, I will say, after everybody watches the rest of your deep dive, and I recommend you reaching out to John Brisson if you haven't yet. John has an interview he did a few days ago or within the last week with Henry Skip Clements, who is one of the other people other than Raymond Martinez with the customs agency, who was very quickly, like you said, they got warrants, they looked into everything. Raymond Martinez starts, hey guys, there's something going on, blowing the whistle. He tries to come back and look at the evidence that they gathered in the warrant search of the warehouse, and they said, oh, it's not available, you have to come back later. And of course we know the whole thing gets shut down. While that's going on, you also had FBI agent Skip Clements, he had already been investigating other similar cases, mainly the Glendale Montessori child sex trafficking abuse case that was going on a little bit later. But he was also aware of the finders and had done some work, and he continued, him along with Raymond Martinez. What I now know is that it seems like Raymond Martinez was pretty scared almost immediately. And for those who watch the documentary, I talk about how I went and flew to where Raymond Martinez lives and works. I found out where he worked, and I tried to go meet him and talk to him after we were communicating via email and then one time via the phone. And then he made it clear that he was like scared. He didn't want to talk anymore. I decided to go make a trip to find him and try to talk to him in person. He told me to get the heck away from him and didn't want to talk to me at all, but I figured I'd give it a shot. I think he's been scared this entire time and has just kind of, they ran him out of the customs agency for speaking up, and they made him, there's a report out there that says like he's known to stick his nose in places that it doesn't belong. And they just basically completely ruined his career. But there was also the FBI agent Skip Clements, who was continued to raise alarm bells, and he went to the Congress people. And so from 87 to 93, he basically kept talking to anybody who could and, bringing forward evidence that he had access to. And that's what brought up the whole thing in 93 when the DOJ investigates it. But fortunately, it wasn't enough, and they still shut that down. And so he has some interesting details that are in this new interview where Skip Clements talks about it. And that's the first time I've heard him, and I believe the first time ever that he's spoken publicly about and on the record about what his role in the finders, how he led the charge to try to get investigated. They at one point had the IRS come audit him and try to come after him. And then he used his FBI connections to get that shut down, and just this whole, lots of crazy stuff. But the point is that there have been people, different agencies that have tried to investigate this, like I was saying earlier with the TPD. And I think this is kind of par for the course with these kinds of things. The local cops, it's even kind of cliche on a TV show, right? Like there's a local cops investigating something, and then like the feds come in and like, hey, this is our scene now, we're taking over. And that's basically what happened.
So I got to ask you, what the $1 million question? We've gone over the documents. I'm going to continue to go through the deep dive. Why do you think this thing got released now? What's the purpose of the timing of this thing?
I don't know, man. I'm trying to, I've been deciphering that. Maybe we need some of those folks who are into the gematria to look at the date and see if there's anything relevant to that date. But I know that it's just kind of interesting that we've got the news from Baden about Epstein was clearly a homicide or whatever. And then we got like finders coming out, and could it be really some turf war? People are like, oh, maybe this is some whistleblower within the FBI. Maybe we should be on the lookout for any FBI agents that die in accidents in the coming days. Maybe they have something. I don't know. I feel like at this point, we only have speculation as to the why. And again, though, if the finders were as big as they're saying 30 years ago in 1987 and 1993, then it's quite possible, and it seems fairly plausible, that they never went away, because that's what their master plan was, to break up and split up and rename and go elsewhere. So they could very well be the octopus that all of us have been looking at and pointing at, and infected various agencies of the U.S. government. And the finders themselves could be behind this document release. That's a possibility we need to consider, is that, again, perhaps this is another final game. This is kind of what I said at the end of the documentary. Is this all just one more game from Marion Petty and the finders?
It's so bizarre, dude. And, when you talk about what they are, people have to realize when you read these documents, that one of the places that they went into was a warehouse, that they had office buildings, that, there wasn't much of a paper trail of how they were funded. They keep asking about the funding mechanism of Petty and his gang throughout these documents. It's super interesting. You guys got to go check out not only his documentary, but his deep dive on this. Derrick, You're running for mayor in Houston. How can people help you there?
Hey, thank you, brother, always for having me on. Look, we got 3 days to the election. I appreciate you giving me a chance to talk about this before as well, and that did bring on some new supporters. If you know anybody in Houston, once again, check out DerrickBroze.com. We were over off the freeway now with me and a friend doing some banner drops out there. So we're doing all kinds of non-traditional activism. We're out there doing phone calls. We're block walking. We're down to the final days today. Early voting ended. So if people are in Houston and they want to support me, Tuesday, November 5th, this coming Tuesday, is the final opportunity to do so. If you're in Houston, we're going to be having a huge election night celebration, just bringing everybody together and having a good time and celebrating, because I think no matter whether or not I become the mayor of Houston, we've definitely advanced the conversations and brought topics into the conversation that would never have been part of this election season had I not chosen to do this. So if you want to help at all, this is one thing, even if you don't live in Houston, if you want to make phone calls and call people in Houston and help us, we have a numbers list of 30,000 registered voters, and we definitely need help hitting up as many of them as possible. So feel free to reach out to me through the channel, or I'll just throw out the campaign phone number. It's my number, 713-909-0382. Feel free to reach out, text me, call me, whatever.
Well, thank you, brother. And I'm going to be going through these documents all the way. Once I get done, I'm sure I'm going to have you back on to talk about this. Guys, support Derrick Broze. He's not only a great researcher, but he's interjecting things into local politics, and that's a big city in the United States. Texas is a big state on a level that most of us can't even dream about. He's a true activist. TheConsciousResistance.com is the website. Thank you once again, my friend.
Thank you, brother. Peace.
You got it. Derrick Broze, everybody. He kills it every time he comes on here. He's very insightful. I want you guys to support his work. He does really, really great stuff. If you like my stuff, now's the time to thumb it up and share it with everybody. I just started. It's November 1st. So we actually have the Media Month 5. Media Month 5. The link is going to be in the description below. I got to change that out. But Media Month 5 has started. You've allowed me to do this for the past 4+ months, and I'm going strong into the 5th month. We have 35,000 subscribers. If you're not thumbing this video up and subscribing, now's the time to do it. Join the Burmese Brigade. You can follow me on Twitter. Remember that all my documentary films are free right here, okay? Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, New World Order Defiant, and Shade the Motion Picture. Thank you, guys, and I will see you all on the flip side.